Hi class, I hope you're all doing well. I cannot believe we're already at the end of our quarter. It's been great reading and watching all of your reading responses, and I look forward to doing so again one last time this week. I hope to see you in the next class. And now I'll just get right into the assignments that we had for this week. So the first was the chapter from the health of sexual minorities. And it was interesting to notice how jarring some of the terminology was, even though it's only a few years old. And I guess that just goes to show how quickly the language is evolving. That the use of transsexual, which is really pretty much fallen by the wayside, even in the literature, just really took me aback, and making distinctions among the transgender community. As to whether they would fall into the category of being transsexual or not, which I thought was, it is something that we seem to have moved past, but not at the time that was written. The specific health issues that she talked about, I thought she went into a good bit of detail for such constrained space, because it's only a chapter. In terms of not only some of the recognized or hypothesized health risks, particularly with regard to hormone replacement therapy, but also addressed the fact that what little data we have is in conflict on some of those things. So, and a lot of it is based on what the impact of some of these therapies are on, say, postmenopausal women, postmenopausal cisgender women, which is not necessarily helpful in predicting what the effect of hormone replacement therapy is going to be on transgender women. So, so that was interesting. The Kaufman chapter was interesting to read again. I love the metamorphosis metaphor at the start. I think it does really a nice job of capturing some of that sense of self-discovery that people have explained to me. And I just love that somebody threw in Kafka as an opener. It is another chapter that felt very dated. And I do wish that Kaufman had updated this for the current edition of the Fenway Guide. But sadly, the chapter was just not included in the second edition. The discussion of sex work, I saw some really interesting conversation on the weekly discussion section on Blackboard, and I didn't necessarily think that he treated it quite as lightly as some people interpreted it as, but I think what may have happened is that he was trying to do too much in a very short space and trying to make sure that he did not stigmatize sex work, and in the process ended up making it sound like it was just a choice among many jobs. In a perfect world, that would be true. We know that that's very much often not the case. Very much often, nice grammar. Often not the case, at least in our culture. And it would have been nice if some distinction had been made about what of those choices are similar to why other people may go into sex work, who are not transgender, and what differences there might be that are specific to the trans community. And I think that really would have only taken a phrase or a sentence or two to accomplish, and I do wish that that space had been used for that. Steiglitz, which I am probably butchering, talked about the role of parents and caregivers a little bit with regard to gender nonconforming children, and really all kids from age 2 to 3 are going to show some gender nonconforming behavior. They're either interested in trains and they're a girl, or they're interested in Barbies and they're a boy. I've seen that in all of my nieces and nephews, all of whom so far appear to identify as cisgender. And I think the response of the parents definitely is important, regardless of whether the child is the one who will ultimately identify as cisgender or transgender, because if they're shut down because of their interest in things that are not considered appropriate to their gender, that's a stress that's put on the child. The degree of stress is going to vary depending on whether this is something that's coming out of a divergent gender identity or not. But I think that it's going to put the stress of my parent is telling me that what interests me is not okay, and I am not, and depending on the degree of response, I'm not safe to have this interest, regardless of anything. Which actually also reminds me of something I had just responded to on Blackboard about how a lot of the institutionalized transphobia does boil down to the idea that a person's gender identity not being in alignment with the sex they're assigned at birth is a choice. And wouldn't it be a wonderful world if it didn't matter? Why is that the defining factor? Why are we so hung up and in this extremely firm box of who it fits in this binary that really is something we've created that is not necessarily the categories we create are not somehow externally valid. They are categories that help us organize our world, but some of them we get extremely rigid about, and gender and sex are definitely two of them. Anyway, slight tangent there. Is the only thing left, the videos? Oh no, there is one more. The study on better measures of sex and gender for research. Yes, because frequently the two are used completely interchangeably. As was mentioned in the article, sometimes the decision is made by the interviewer, either based on somebody's voice or based, if they're doing phone interviews, or based on their appearance if it's face-to-face. And that's really completely not a valid way to assess somebody's gender or sex, because it comes to the old, we know what happens when you assume. A number of their assumptions are going to be incorrect. So a measure that actually looks at sex assigned at birth and gender identity kind of would do a better job of capturing. And they did some work with adolescents to see if they would understand the questions about a sex assigned at birth and gender identity, and it seemed that they would, so that was very encouraging. Last but definitely not least, the videos from Basic Rights Oregon were incredible. And I would like to sit down every healthcare provider and make them watch them. Because actually hearing from people what their own experiences have been, and I like particularly that they included a doctor as well as transgender patients, so that you get that piece, that side, and that perspective as well. It was just really powerful. And Dr. Dolan's point that giving care to somebody who's transgender is not difficult. Absolutely everything else is what ends up being difficult, whether it's the insurance, whether it's whatever. And that speaks again to the fact that it's really about it's about institutionalized transphobia as opposed to anything else. So that's my take on this week's readings. Wow, I'm actually under 10 minutes. I better stop before I am not. So anyway, have a good between quarters break, and I look forward to seeing at least some of you in the next class. Bye.